See if we can get our green lights here. All right. Welcome, creatives, community, and kind folks, to the channel RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and we are still continuing our discussion this week on game design, art, and arithmetic. And for those who do not know, this show is a long form. We delve into things in long form content. So each week we pick a subject, and of course the subject is game design, and we subdivide it each day. Today is World Building Wednesday, and so we are, despite the fact that you can't get away from world building when it comes to game design, we're going to delve a little bit into that. And just as a reminder, at the end of the show, about 5 to 10 minutes or so, I will be talking about a game that I am designing. And I thought, what a great way to segue into projects that I'm working on myself. So, game design, normally we talk about in-world things when it comes to like Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games. But when it comes to game design, you can't not talk about the meta of it. And yesterday, we did hit upon something. I think we can delve into it today, and that is to not get caught in the world builder's trap of wanting to design so much that you write and or like painting yourself into a corner where there's very little space for the player characters to engage in the world, to become to make the players the important characters as opposed to the world being the important thing. Also, holding on to the fact that your world cannot be changed, and to leave space for, well, players to destroy it. If you plan on publishing, and maybe we'll talk about this today, more or less getting into publishing ideas and terminology and things like that when it comes to game design. Now, I've never produced a fully functioning, independent role-playing game myself, which is what I plan on doing with my role-playing game known as Retcon. It's going to be like a micro game in a way, and it's going to have its own foundational mechanics. But I have produced materials, 9 books so far, and I'm a contributing writer to other projects such as in End World, and written. I've now just put out material for Onyx Path Publishing, and I hope to write for other people. So I do have some experience, although it's small when it comes to some of these other publishers that have been doing it, self-publishing themselves for 20 plus years and whatnot. So I am both a successful publisher and panicked at the same time, and I think that goes through everyone's head. One of the things, talk about panic, one of the very most difficult things to do is to create something and then leave it in the hands of other people when you don't have the ability to talk with them. And when it comes to world building especially, it can be very difficult because I know all of us would rather not give our elevator pitch. We would rather sit down and talk to people for hours on end about what our world is about and the things that you do in it and our concepts. But unfortunately, you can't do that. You got to catch somebody with the elevator pitch. You have to catch them with an intro or some kind of documentation or an image or a feeling or a piece of action or a twist on history or something like that to catch people. And unfortunately, that means that people will read your materials or delve into your materials or read your wiki page or whatever the case may be, and they may not get it. And that's a weird thing to say, but you could be a prodigy of description and still people may not get it. And the reason why I say that we have absolute proof of that. All of us can watch the exact same movie and we come away with with different experiences. A whole room of people sitting in the dark watching one image, well, not one image, but many numbers of images, and come away with it with a different feeling. Same thing goes with an art museum or a piece of music or whatnot. And that's because individuals have different types of experiences. So I would suggest, like, don't try to please everyone. Try to stay true to the core essential value of what you are designing, and then others may get into it. So, for example, if you're a world builder and you want something that is dark and gritty, has very adult themes in it, and you warn people of those adult themes, don't be dissuaded when other people go, "Oh man, this is too dark and wild and descriptive for me. I hate this game." Right now, some people, we are in a trigger-like society, and sometimes people will say things that they don't are. It's either 1 or 10 for people nowadays. Like, they either have to love it 10, 10, 10, or they hate it. It's a 1. And whereas most human beings are very nuanced. Our experiences are different. Our psychologies are different. Our ages are different. And our gaming experience is different as well. Tabletop gaming experience. And sometimes, if take a look at search for the 8 types of fun. And yes, there are articles for tabletop gaming, although it was designed, the 8 types of fun is a mantra for video gaming, in the sense that some people are rewarded or feel pleasurable experiences based on 8 different types of factors in the video gaming industry. And so maybe your game and or your world may not be the thing that sparks something in them. Some people really love rewards, whether it's a game that gains levels or points or character options or magical items or psychic abilities or going shopping with equipment. It's some players really love to go shopping or crafting or things like that, and they really embrace the individualism of creating something on their own. Whereas there are other players who just enjoy the camaraderie or the discovery, or even self-reflection. And sometimes those two may not meet together. So I would say stick to your core essential value. And if you can't please everybody, then you can't please everyone. It's weird, but in our own gaming community, it's strange how the word optional or your own table or ask your DM or use this only if seem to like sweep over some people's heads, and they just get extremely upset that other people are doing things different than them, or that there's an option that they don't like, and so they get really upset. It's like, I can't believe this is in the game, and everyone's like, you did see the word option in that sentence, right? That could become an issue. Also, when it comes to world building, and this is outside the game, sorry to tell you this, but you may create the most vast, detailed, immersive role-playing game with the best uh, mechanics ever created. If no one knows about your game, it doesn't matter, right? Like, now, mind you, if you do that for your friends, and the goal is to create a thing, and it's just for your friends, or maybe it's just a goal, like, I've always wanted to write a book, and you write the book and put it up on your own shelf, there's nothing wrong with that. Or if you're just a world builder, you have world builder's disease, and you just love, you have a booklet of 8,000 NPCs complete with uh, you know head and shoulder pictures you snatched off the internet, and it's just for your own good, that's good. But if you want to sell it, heck, give it out for free and have people delve into it, or you wanted to spread it amongst your own social media group, you're going to need to let it go, and you're going to need to let it get out there. And that means that you're going to have to talk about it publicly. And that means self-promotion. And we, as a community, are terrible at self-promotion. Me being a primary candidate of said thing, right? So it can be very difficult, and it almost feels a little bit like a combination of like arrogance or narcissism combined with a little bit of prostitutionalizing ourselves. But self promotion, when it comes to your own creation, is very important to allow it to reach as many fans. And I will tell you that self promotion isn't terrible if it's something you if it's something, a product you use, right? So you sometimes you'll see famous people and they stand there and they hold up the widget and they're like, I love this widget because it's great, and you're just rolling your eyes like they don't use that, they just got paid, they're just saying words. No one believes that. But if it's coming from you yourself, if it's a product you'd use, meaning like you created this world or you created this game or this supplement or something, then you have to promote it. Now the difficulty of promotion in our world is a strange dichotomy between promoting your game, selling your game, and I don't mean monetarily, but getting people to buy into your game and your world. Is that in our world of instant gratification, marketing and selling things are a long-term goal, because you don't want to burn bridges. You want to build a fire, you want to stoke the flames of interest in your game, and it can be very difficult. And the reason why it's difficult is because we all hate ads, and we have ad blockers, and we don't like people spamming our social media for any reason, or doing self promotion when it's something that's annoying. And I think the reason for that is because, well, it feels self serving, right? So, for example, me, if all I did is talk about, because I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight here. You want to be value added as an individual. And then therefore your value added as an individual spreads into your creation and people don't feel as bad. So an example would be that, let's take a chef, right? Let's take someone who cooks great meals and they are a chef and they really want to use sell their baked goods. Well, a chef also may be very good at cooking other things. And so they can become very value added in terms of making meals for other people. And they go, wow, you cook really great foods. And this is a great dinner or a fish item or steak or stir fry, and go so on and so forth. And then as you become value added, as the chef learns to cook many other things and cook for other people, then they start to insert, oh, by the way, I made these chocolate chip cookies. Taste them. And they go, wow, I've tasted everything else you did. What's this? Wow, what is that? Is that a cinnamon? I can't tell what that is. That saffron? What is your special ingredient? I can't tell you, but you can come back for more. And so then people are far more willing, because you've been value added. You've given away something. They've gotten more from you than they feel you from them. And so whatever or however you self promote yourself, begin by being value added in whatever social media group you are. And when I say social media, I'm literally talking like hanging at the table with your friends. Be value added to them. Be a friend. Be someone they can come to and talk to about advice. Be someone who responds with some advice here and there that is preferable, or point them in the direction of other people that are not you, to help them do a thing. Even if you're a great artist and you go, you know what, I'm glad you love my art, but here's someone else who's probably preferable for what you're trying to do. Be willing to prop up other people. And so being value added just means that be careful of how you relate to other people on social media, because if you're like a negative nanny and you're always like, oh, this sucks, this is stupid, this is dumb, or you get into too much politics or religion or whatnot, people may not consider you value added. So then when you start to talk about your own particulars, then they will not listen to you. And so they may cast aside your creation, which they might do that initially. Zax, the Zax 200 Says my lizardfolk fighter in the game. Um, in the game, I'm a player and specializes in Cliff Mountain oysters, like the Rocky Mountain variety, but off giant boar instead. Wait, okay, so are the oysters found like are do they grow on giant boars, or are there giant boars in the Rocky Mountains that? You're so silly. You're funny. Zach's like, oh, you're talking about out of game. No, 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 no. We can talk in game stuff too, but I was just making a point that when you're trying to sell your game, when I say your game, whether it's a full-fledged role-playing game or a supplement or an adventure or anything you're trying to design, when it comes to game design, that you got to start out being value added, and that is a long-term goal in a instant gratification society, and it can feel. Oh, Rocky Mountain oysters are bull balls. Ooh, let me get the taste out my mouth. Hold on. Gurgle, gurgle. Oh, oof. uh, oh man, Rocky Mountain oysters +2 bonus to my. So, would that give you extra stamina or extra seduction? I'm thinking stamina, but it would convince you there would be extra seduction. I'm thinking. So, to end that, when the point about being value added is that when you pop into your social media of choice and you respond to other people's comments, try to be positive, or at least don't say anything. If someone has a question, try to answer the questions or respond specifically to what people write. Like sometimes people will say, "Hey, I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, and my friends love science fiction. How can what are some good resources to turn my Dungeons and Dragons game into a sci-fi setting?" Try not to respond with, "We'll play another game," because that's not the comment that was made, right? Try to stay on point. Like you could suggest that, but first respond with all right, well, here are 3 links to some really great games where someone has reshaped Dungeons and Dragons into science fiction, because that's specifically what the individual stated. Then after they have a conversation like, "Oh, that's really great. I'm having or I'm having trouble doing this thing and this other thing." And then you respond with, "Well, there are these 3 other science fiction games that are not Dungeons and Dragons, and their rules aren't even similar to it. That considering what you're trying to talk about, whether it's exploration or mind uploading or alien armadas in a war or something, you're like, well, here, these 3 other games might be more preferable if that's the kind of thing you're looking for and your group is looking for, right?" But um, it's like you really want to not be the. I find that there's no benefit, despite the fact that everybody seems to do it online with science fiction. I mean, with responding in social media, is the idea that like you fold your arms, pout, and go, "I think that's stupid," or "My group doesn't do it that way," and like there's no. It's a hard stop in a conversation, right? As opposed to going, here's a thing that our group does. Maybe this might be good for you, or I've tried it that way. Be careful because as it's a conversation is a back and forth, and when people just post things in social media that are hard stops, and then you try to sell yourself, you're going to get a lot of hard stops against what you're trying to do. Yeah. Zach's telling you about his character. The Zach's 200 says the original 6 Might and Magic games were pure fantasy until you got to board a friggin' UFO at the end of each one. Yeah, sometimes you could do a little bit of a twist. Which is here's another thing that's a little bit strange and very difficult to create, and that's the thematic twist or the setting twist, and it can be a little bit daunting to do this. And what I mean by it is like having designing a fantasy realm and then finding out it's all virtual reality. You're on a starship or something, or designing uh, a science fiction world, but everyone landed on an alien planet and they're living in fantasy realm. For some reason, despite the fact that science fiction fantasy used to be combined together back in, when I say back in the day, back in the Lovecraftian pulp action period of time, it was always common. Magic and science was it. There was no separation, but as the genres grew, they split, and so now today we have a separation. And in our tabletop gaming community, there's a lot of people who just absolutely hate like computers or robots or firearms mixed with their magic. There are Shadowrun, aficionados and people who play in sci-fi settings where there are pseudo magical options, but for some reason, there's a weird. So if you're trying to sell your game on that, be careful that you will have negative nannies out there who are just like, your idea is stupid, fold arms, pout, and you're just going to have to push through it. You're just going to have to push through it. Now, one problem with pushing through and ignoring people, I'll get your comment there, Zach, in a minute, is that there's a proverb that's like, oh, if one person tells you you're an ass, you're a donkey, then you can punch them in the throat, figuratively speaking. But when two people tell you, you might want to look behind you and look for a tail. When three people tell you, it's like you might as well get a rope and put on a saddle, right? And the idea behind that is if there's something mechanically strange about your game, or there's a line, you've written some rules and people are reading your rules and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Believe you me, some of the greatest designers with a host of people behind them still make mistakes. Magic the Gathering has a whole cadre of people who create that game, and what happens? They've created cards that don't that end up making infinite loops, and they have to ban them. We have game designers that put something out there and they're like, we play tested it, we balanced it, and all of a sudden some 14-year-old is like, I can break the game by adding this plus this, and the creators are like, don't. That's going to happen. That's going to happen. And so you may have to institute a little bit of rules as interpreted, or rules as implied rather than rules as written. And you're going to have to worry about those individuals as well, because some people take rules as written as a mantra rather than going, well, the rule, it really isn't supposed to work this way, but it's supposed to work this other way, and that's it. Yeah, like Mufa. Sorry about rules as intended. RAI versus RAW. I think there's a third one out there. That's referred to that way, and sometimes mathematically it's very difficult to portray something that has a bit of a nuance in our real life, and a rule setting may be very difficult to imply it. I think there's something in 5th edition today where you can infinitely generate money by doing something for free, or so. I can't. It's something like you can find. It's like you can find something like a staff or whatever in the wild, which is free, and then sell it for like a couple of copper or gold pieces to make an infinite amount of money and stuff. And it's just like, no, it's not how that was supposed to work. Even if it could work that way, that's not how the world works. So, but people get crazy. Movicall, what's going on? Says, when the players try to combine technology and magic, things often go a bit crazy when you play with engineers and the like. Yeah, because again, because I've played with like engineers and psychologists, and at least in the student form. And today, me being, I hit the big 5-0. There's lots of people who are professionals in their own, whether they're a survivalist or ex-military or something. And it's like, yeah, I get that you're a professional I don't know, rangefinder or sniper or something, but you know, this game doesn't take into account, gravity and wind conditions and all that kind of business. And yeah, it's like it's the problem with movie samurais and real samurais. It's like, well, yes, I get that the Bushido Code really isn't this thing, but in this game, it's basically a paladin's oath. You're just going to have to roll with it, right? And that's why rules as intended came about, because it's like, well, you can fall from any height and survive. Well, that's not exactly how it was intended, but it's also not supposed to be a save or die. So yeah, come up with a reason why you survived the fall and move on. Zax200 says, I think introducing sci-fi aspects isn't bad. Where most people draw the line is at firearms. Maybe come to the conclusion that if most fantasy worlds are in the uh, carboniferous age, almost no coal, giant trees, little other resources required for gunpowder, you can still introduce other sci-fi aspects, such as computers and spaceships, but the weaponry will still be medieval. Well, I'm going to burst the bubble a little bit. We only think that firearms destroy fantasy because we're only familiar with, we have literally an example of one, which is our own world, which doesn't have magic, and firearms over a long period of time destroyed what would be considered the medieval world. It wasn't instantaneous, and I guarantee you for probably 200 or 300 years, there were a number of people who were like, firearms will never make it. They'll never take over the sword and armor. There were people who lived and died during that time, and I think we are like, okay, let me give you a very specific example. Why does a longsword in Dungeons and Dragons do 1d8 damage? There is no reason. The reason is because the designer said it so. So we assume that if you're going to introduce firearms, they're going to be more powerful, but there's no reason for that. You could literally just reskin a crossbow or a wand, a magical wand, or any other ranged weapons as a firearm and just have it do that kind of damage without breaking the game. And I can hear people going, well, that doesn't sound right because bullets pass through things and blah blah blah. And I contend to you, sure, but the game doesn't include that. When you get hit with a longsword in Dungeons and Dragons, you don't bleed or have your arm fall off. That's not how the game works. So why would we then reskin the game to operate with real world firearms? They don't have to. And that's one of the things we as players and designers and dungeon masters try to incorporate things that aren't in the game the way it's designed, and that can be terrible. Now, yes, if you say in my world firearms are vastly more powerful than medieval weaponry, you can say that, sure. But in the real world, not only was that not the case, but it doesn't even have to be the case whether it is the case or not. When firearms were created, they didn't go, ooh, AK-47, Mufa says, what's interesting is that gunpowder was used throughout most of the medieval period. It sure was. It took a long time before gunpowder was used in an industrialized, multiple formed, accepted method to fire, large solid objects through the air towards other people, right? It took a while, and it took a while even after it was used on the battlefield. It then took a while for it to become a stable use. Remember when firearms were first created, not only were they inaccurate, they were also unreliable, susceptible to weather conditions, and it required like armies of people to use them effectively. It wasn't like, here's a pistol, go ahead and dominate the world, right? It took a while before an individual with a single firearm became an effective soldier. As a matter of fact, I don't have it. I have a real world book of samurai. An individual was a historian and took pictures, and he showed them with long arms, samurai with rifles. It's actually kind of a cool. It's a really sweet image, but you don't think about samurai with rifles on their back. But it's really good. Maybe tomorrow. But I do. Now that I segued away from that, sorry. Yes, Zax, I do agree. I love sci-fi elements in fantasy because it just reminds me of the fact that it's always been there. Plus, I have a soft spot for Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, a D&D adventure where literally a door opens in a mountainside and the player characters go into a starship. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons characters, fighters at the time, thieves, magic user, go into said doorway and go into an alien ship. It's pretty cool. It's really cool. And there's a hint that the ship could lift off into space, but I don't think I don't think anyone's ever played the game where it happened that way. But I'd love to hear about it if it did. Yeah. Zach's like, physicist. How the hell is this guy allowed to reload a hand crossbow 4 times in 6 seconds? Also, physicist. Plays a wizard turning pebble into fireballs. Yeah, we get caught up in that kind of stuff. It's like, if the game was, if Dungeons and Dragons was a simulationist game, it took all of those aspects into account, then I would say, sure, take into account physics and physical bodily trauma by being hit with a bullet, and take all that into account. But the way the game is set up, it doesn't do that. So why would we then incorporate these other rules? And that's where you now there are other games. Here we go with the suggestion of other games. There are other games that incorporate that. Dead Man, hey, what's going on there? We'll have to talk to you when the show ends, because I want to hear if you're all right and how you're doing there, sir. Anyway, for those who don't know, the show is TriCast over Twitch, YouTube, and our own Discord server. And sorry, one of our moderators is back, and I just want to see how he's doing. Anyway, Zach says, I'm amused by the idea of a firearmless world with star cruisers firing ballista at each other from orbit. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Or, yep, Movacall. How can this cat run 1,680 feet per round? Yeah. 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 That's because there's a way to optimize your movement rate, and it's like, yeah. Like Movacall says, there are lots of things that is difficult to explain that you can do in the rules. Right. Hey, most things when you get above, say, 7th level in Dungeons and Dragons is a bit unexplainable. My fighter, 20th level fighter, has 9 attacks in 6 seconds, One word, mic drop, monks. Yeah. I can fall from any distance and suffer no damage. Wait, what? I can punch that dragon in the throat and paralyze him. What? I'm going to leg trip that ooze. Wait, what? No, I know. Sometimes it's funny when you read, this isn't just Dungeons and Dragons, this is any game. It's funny sometimes when you have, you see a rule set and they describe an action that you can perform maybe in 1 or 2 sentences. And then there's 18 lines of corner cases they have to unexplain themselves out of to allow the capability to be used, because everyone knows that without those rules or rulings, people would abuse it, right? Whereas, as opposed to allowing the narrative to represent the action or inaction. It's okay. So the example would be not using encumbrance, but somebody wants to carry 87 weapons. And they're like, well, there's no encumbrance rules. And everyone's looking at the person like, sure, there's no rules, but you're breaking the verisimilitude, or I'm always allowed to make a roll. Just because my door fell off the cliff, maybe I can flap my arms and fly to the other side. And you're like, okay, just because the rules say, well, maybe make a die roll to see if you succeed, doesn't mean that we're breaking the verisimilitude of the world that you can flap your arms and not die, right? Like, so I think sometimes the gamification of games sometimes overrides the rules as intended, and that can be a problem. But guess what? If you write a game, people may take you at your face value and try to gamify your game. So you got to be careful of that. And it can be very difficult to write yourself out of a thing, you know. Movicall says, I think the max feet per turn with all the buffs and abilities is 5,400 feet in one turn. Ooh, 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 ooh. That's crazy. That's funny. Because you're like, it's like teleportation as long as you can reach, you know, it's like playing the Flash or whatnot. Yeah, there is no map you can use. You're like, I can move so fast I can run on other people's maps and do things. Call up random people like, hello? Yeah, I'm in your Zoom call because I have 5,400 feet of movement and I'm in this other game, but I can move so fast. I just need to move my thing through your Roll20 game to move through somebody else's D&D Beyond game to come back to my world. Oh man. Oh, if only there were VR worlds where you could do that. I think one day in the future we may have something like that. But also, lastly, I'll say this when it comes to world building and game design and designing your own things is that game designers sometimes create things for us for a purpose that we may not see. And you yourself may make something in your game that people may not see. And by modifying it or removing it or ignoring the thing, it may cause a cascading effect with unintended consequences. So be careful of trying to modify something if you don't understand or you haven't tried to extrapolate why a thing is there. Let me give you an example of what Dungeons and Dragons has done to themselves in terms of unintended consequences. So the encumbrance rules and the gold expenditure rules were there at a period of time where it was very important how much gold you could collect because it was tied around experience points. And you then used that gold treasure after you beat people about the head and shoulders to, at a certain point in your gaming career, which would be between like ninth and 11th level, ninth to 12th level, your character would retire. I think it was 8 to 12. This was in AD&D, and you were expected to retire your character, or for the most part, not adventure very much because you had like 5 or 6 or 8 other characters, newbies sitting in the background that you would play your entourage, and those characters would become their own characters. Well, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons over time, and they didn't just do this. Over time, they got rid of name level, which was basically at 10th level you retired, and anything above that was epic level play. And therefore getting rid of a reason to spend all that gold and ignoring encumbrance. So now you have players running around with lots of gold, unintended consequence, and no place to spend it, an unintended consequence. So sometimes there are things in games, whether it's die rolls or saving throws or little weirdisms that we see today, and we're like, why did they make that a bonus action instead of, or why do I have to expend a chi point or I don't know, a specialty die or do this thing to do this other thing? Why can't I do it directly? And a lot of times it's because of an issue with an unintended consequence of doing a thing, right? uh yeah, like Zach's is mentioning the movement rate, like, yeah, talking to Overcall. But anyway, says, yeah, that movement rate doesn't help with damage. It's like a speeding bullet slapping you in the face with all the force and effect of a tantrum throwing child. Yeah, the one doesn't have anything to do with the other. And I wish I wished movement rate had something to do with it, but now now we have an unintended consequence of super speedsters flowing through the air like a sheet of paper or feather, rather than moving at 5,400 feet per turn and slamming into something at that respective speed using physics. And yeah, the game doesn't incorporate that. Thankfully, it does not, because woof, ooh, everybody would be. It would be Acceleration Nation, the role playing game, if that happened. Um, Zax 200 says Bear Totem Goliath Barbarian with a strength of 24. Encumbrance? What's that? I have a max carrying capacity of 810 pounds. Yeah, if we looked at that. So usually, rules is intended. We're like, your PC really can or can't carry that. Makes no sense. Uh, yeah, when the Pack Party Mule is also a PC. Like, for example, I always find it funny that players may have, like, I've got 8,000 gold pieces. And in my mind, I'm going, and listen, I'm being sarcastic here, but like, did your player character actually count all that? Because I'm going to let you know right now, if I get to about 500 or 600 pennies, I'm done. Like, there's no way I'm counting 200,000 pieces of gold to pay for something. And where would you put it all? And who's paying for it? Like, are there like these weird dwarven or gnomish change machines that people are pouring stuff into? I always find that pretty ridiculous. We're like, oh, I'm surprised people are literate, but I've got 87,000 gold pieces, and I'm thinking, you would never know if you had that much because you probably never counted that high. And you're also too busy fighting things to bother to do that. And if you were to pour that much gold on the table, I guarantee you most of it's going to disappear, because people are going to go, oh, one for you, one for me, two for you, one, two for me. um, Lovacall says, example for rule change. If you let players move magical traps or place magical rune traps and the like, then allow them to dig out the floor tile. Yep, with the trap floor tile with the trap, place it in their bag of holding. Then they will do that for days, get spell slots, make more traps, and place it in the bag. Yep. And 2 years later, you have a bag filled with floor tiles, ready to kill a Tarrasque in one turn. Also, the reason most god creatures have the ability to survive huge damage effects. Yeah, because they had to write that in because of players doing things like that. I also think that it's really strange. I get it. It's fun to have these thought experiments. Like, what if I were to, like you mentioned, Movacall, like, oh, I'm going to put a rune on the floor, pick up the rune and put it in my bag and do that over and over again. Or what the other one, the bag of holding, portable hole rule, arrow shot, where you launch it at someone and the bag of holding, when it strikes, collapses around the portable hole and causes the thing. And the singularity arrow. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, that was a very common one. The I'm going to summon pixies. Is it pixies or sprites that can shape change into T-Rexes or something or whatever? It's like, yeah, I get it in a vacuum, that kind of stuff works, but in a real world, you're like, that kind of thing. The world as intended, rather than rule as intended, isn't designed there for you to do that. Or here's the other idea: most players that come up with those things don't want game masters creating the exact same thing for their own use in the world against the players, right? Like, I think someone said, oh, I can use a friend spell to convince someone to use a feigned death spell on them and then cut their throat, and I could kill anybody with it. And it's like, yeah, sure, let me use that against you as a player. And it's like, well, that's unfair. You're like, well, it's either all or nothing, right? So I think sometimes it's like, yeah, I hear your intention, but you're doing it in a vacuum, Zax 200 says, this is why, even though I normally hesitate to give out magic items, the first major quest reward in my campaign is always a bag of holding. Yeah. Lots of bags of holding, which is weird too. Like, bags of holding. What about the handy haversack? Anybody remember those? Yeah. Zach says that's an easy solution. As soon as the rune is no longer on the floor, it's impotent. Yeah, and of course things can be temporary, things can be broken, things don't work the way you intended them to work because you're not using them in the manner in which they are. Maybe you could be interrupted from doing said thing as well. Movcall says that is the rule as written. The moment a player moves it, it does no longer work. The DM can still use it for complex traps and like only the players cannot move them. Yeah, DMs have always had that, which is another weirdism. DMs have always had the ability to adjudicate the rules. It's like a perfect example is the necromancer that has an army of undead. Do we really look at the rules to find out how many undead a necromancer can make? Sure, you could, but most people don't. They just go, here's the big bad, here's an army of undead that they have under their control, and we're done with it, right? Dungeon Masters have always had the ability to break the rules. We just trust that the DM breaks the rules within the confounds of the narrative of the setting that we play. And yeah, Zach says, I had players throw a folding boat at a team bad guy and have it unfold when it hit them. Had to change the rules on that one afterward. Oh yeah, folding boat. What's the other one? Darren's Instance Fortress, I believe it's called. It's another one. People taking the iron brick and sliding it towards bad guys all the time. Yep. Always got to let the players try shenanigans and succeed, then use the same shenanigans against them later. Yeah, plus, remember, it's a setting. If they do it once, someone's going to hear about it. They do it twice, it becomes like a major rumor, and eventually it becomes like everyone's like, oh, did you hear about the people that have the portable castle? And everyone's like, yeah. It's the same thing of using, what is it, the tiny hut spell, and people like piling rocks on top of it and setting fires around it, or cast, what I mean? Like stuff like that. Mofa says, I can be flexible with raw when needed, and sometimes let players determine how rules should be applied, but always warn them anything they can do, I can do better. Exactly. Also, here sorry. Damn, that was a ton of noise. Sorry about that. Got my copy of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. And one of the funniest things I think when designing games is that 99% of the time, after you've written your game or setting or something like that, a lot of times you'll have to do the what is this game about, right? So like here in Natasha's Everything, of course, this is written for like probably the fifth time in 5th edition and more, but there's a part in the book where it says using this book. And let's see. 10 rules to remember. The DM adjudicates the rules. The rules of D&D cover many of the twists and turns that come up in play, but the possibilities are so vast that the rules cannot cover everything. When you encounter something that the rules don't cover, or you're unsure how to interpret a rule, the DM decides how to proceed, aiming for a course that brings the most enjoyment to your whole group. Funny how that's all that. First of all, that rule has already been printed and reprinted. I believe it is in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It is in Xanathar's Guide. They reprinted it here. And it's funny how sometimes people will take rules as written and never repeat the words, the DM is the final arbiter, or that there are elements in the game that also say, hey, talk with your DM before you do this thing. And I just find it really weird when people are like, they'll read a thing and then go like, well, I'm just going to ignore the rest of it. It's like, no, you should probably read the whole rule. Heck, we did that on this channel where we read the Outlander background. They're like, oh, the Outlander background automatically finds food and water and stuff. Like, no, actually, it says they can automatically find food and water if there's a potential to do so. The game master can say there isn't any food and water around, in which case you cannot automatically find it. So we have to be careful of that. I think there's a lot of rules in, like, say, 5th edition that's like that. The rule on improvised weapons is kind of done that way, where people misinterpret it like, oh, it only does a D4 damage. That's not what the rule says, or that's not what it completely says. Or we assume that there's a rule where there isn't one. Like the grease spell creates grease. Like it doesn't actually say that. You can say in your game that the grease spell creates grease, which can be lit on fire, but the rule doesn't say that. The same thing with casting a fireball underwater or using a lightning bolt near near metal objects or something. Like there's no physics involved in it. But we as a group now, if we as a group were like, you know what, you're wearing metal armor and stuff, yeah, maybe it should, you don't want to do that, swimming in plate mail, like there's no rules against that, but you can incorporate them. I think it makes sense. So I think just sometimes we add things in there that aren't there, don't read what is there, and then we sometimes then use all that to break the verisimilitude of what is supposed to be happening, which is not industrializing magic to the point of like every day I'm going to cast a spell for a year, and you're like, yeah, it sounds cool, but what is your PC? Your PC is just going to do this for an entire year? I mean, most people get bored, and if you don't get bored, you're a psychopath of some sort. Like, what? you know? So yeah, it's a weirdism how because we are not immersed in the world that on the outside in a vacuum, we can always do things. And yeah, it just becomes a little bit of a problem. And when we try to design our own systems, you're going to find people who are going to try to break your system as much as possible. And so that's where like play testing comes in and game design. Yep. Prestidigitation dry cleaners. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen people abuse prestidigitation and thaumaturgy to the point where you're just like, yeah, no. Yeah, it's like it's still a cantrip. You can't get away with it. Well, I'm going to trick the demon lord. You're like, no. Rules intended is a cantrip. You're not using that against a CR18 creature. But I'm going to convince him my voice is Asmodeus or Asmodeus, depending on how you pronounce it. Like, yeah, no, that's not how that works. But anyway, guys, we're coming to the end, and we're going to segue just a little bit into the game that I'm designing, because I already warned you ahead of time that Retcon the RPG, although it's not going to be Retcon : the RPG, it's just going to be called Retcon, a game of tachyonic espionage. And it's basically going to be a modern sci-fi fantasy setting in which you play agents that are trying to keep our time stream aligned and not frayed as invaders and other forces, both natural and devious, try to manipulate, change, and alter the timeline. Now, it will be using its own set of rules, and today is World Building Wednesday, so I'll talk a little bit about the world building. But I'm an individual that loves high concepts, and so there's plenty of Dungeons and Dragons. There's plenty of heck science fiction out there, but I'm just addicted to high concepts. Like one of my personal favorites, is Wraith the Oblivion, the first and second editions, I guess, or reprinting from White Wolf Games back in the late 90s. I think it came out after, the other vampire and whatnot, where you play someone who's dead. And so it's got a whole world of you running around in a world between the living, known as the Quick, and the dead, and the Ravagers and Specters and all that kind of stuff, and fetters that hold you to the living world and whatnot. I like those big concepts. One time I ran a game called the Vanguardians, and the minimum level of power in the game was like Silver Surfer. The game was basically built around, you're an alien, you represent your alien world, and you are given I think it was called a companion stone from an ancient civilization that basically allowed you to fly naked through space. And you could shoot blasts that can cover tens of thousands of kilometers and move planets out the way, and it was very like uh, very very high concept, powerful, and stuff like that, and had a little bit of fun doing that, running that game. So I'm into that. I think one of these days I'm probably going to use this new dream build juxtapose system that I'm making to do a shoot 'em up John Wick Equilibrium styled. What's the other game? What's the other gun kata movie or show? I can't think of it off the top of my head. Wanted, that's it. Wanted. Build something around there where you're like curving bullets and juggling guns and gun trapping and all that other kind of business. Like modern day gunfighting and whatnot. I love that kind of stuff. I still have my notes for uh, the people who can have the ability to teleport anywhere they want to. So I'm a big I, I'm an addict for high concepts, and I always loved time travel, but not after having seen Tenet. It made me think of like what's this? There's a small movie called Primer, um, Source Code, of course, all of the iterations of about to say Transformers. Wow, the Terminator series. I like time travel in the sense of not getting in a vehicle to go somewhere, but that time has been altered, and you have to kind of like manipulate it, or make sure it doesn't manipulate you, or navigate in a world where time travel has been uh, incorporate it into the world and move around it. Dead Man says Wraith the Oblivion was released in '94, first edition, and '96, the second edition. Yeah, I couldn't remember because I think the second edition just cleaned up a little bit of the slightly bit of the rules and added in things that they forgot. They were like, "Ooh, we should have added this in there," and they added in it. It's a pretty dark and somber game. Oh, Wraith the Oblivion. Ooh, yeah, you kind of have to add a lot of lightheartedness and hope in it because it's very dark. It is a grim dark game incarnate. But yeah, so yeah, retcon is going to be. I've already. I will be releasing like the primers for it. I'll end up searching for like artwork or trying to come up with some myself. I'm going to. I know the guys I work with, Critical Hit, Alex and Rob. I didn't want them to be not that I don't want them to be part of it. I didn't want them to feel obligated to work on this with me. So Alex is really good at layout, but trying to get some really good artwork is going to be pretty difficult. Probably what I'll do is do what I always do, which is manipulate lots of like uh, free stuff, license free materials that I have out there, and use a lot of that to incorporate it. There's some pretty good things out there anyway, but yeah, we'll get into the mechanics of it. Lastly, the mechanics are a 2-die-8 system, and it's a 2-die-8 system. Roll equal or lower. So you want to roll a 1, which is basically because I mentioned this before, like a singularity. You want one time stream. An 8 is really not an 8; it's infinity. You don't want that because anything could happen. And you have two. You're going to pick two of your statistics, and you're going to roll both dice. You want to try to get equal to or below it, so that you can either completely succeed by rolling both dice and succeeding, completely fail by rolling two dice and failing, or get somewhere in the middle where you might both succeed and fail. And then doubles are like crits and fumbles, I guess. That's the terrible description. Um, and there really isn't. There are hit points, if you want to call them hit points, which is going to be called drive, and there's also going to be a stat called time. I might change the name of it, but you can expend time to do your special abilities. And of course, in the game, the way it's designed is when you run out of time, you've literally run out of time, and you may fail in your endeavors. It's kind of like, chasing, hunting, investigating someone down, and you run out of time, then it's too late now. The bomb goes off, that kind of thing. So it's a meta concept, but I'm incorporating it into the game. Same thing with like flex timing. We're going to have flex time rules. We're going to. I'll get more into detail, but I just wanted to go over that in this last 10 minutes of the show. So anyway, guys, thank you very much. I will be releasing some of the information shortly, probably like next week a little bit. I'll release it on my Google Doc, and then you guys can take a look at it. And then and it'll be like a little primer and character creation and some of the world building, like adversaries, like what are you going to do in this world, or what can you do, and stuff like that. It'll give a little bit more detail. So as it comes to fruition. So you guys, thank you very much for being part of the show. Tomorrow is Third Pillar Thursday. We're going to talk about, of course, we're going to talk about the third pillar because that's my specialty. But we're going to talk about it in terms of game design, as in like where do you want? You've created this game. Where is it going to go? What are people doing in your world? How much of it are you going to allow to be manipulated by the people who play your game and the people who want to maybe purchase your game, or the dungeon master that wants to manipulate your game, versus how concrete is it in your game, And we're going to go over some other things, some other meta objects too. And of course, talk about anything you guys want to talk about. So anyway, guys, thank you very much. Please like, share, subscribe, let people know about the channel. Why am I so blurry? You guys didn't let me know that. Come on. It's you get one of these auto cameras, autofocus cameras, and sometimes it like you have to like do the little ink pen thing or the fingertip thing. Cause see, like my ink pen, come on, autofocus. Wow. Maybe it doesn't like my face. Anyway, guys, have a great one. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye. That is really weird.